following presentation is an Delmarva Studios production.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of the Flat Earth Files. I'm your host as always, George. Hope you're having a good day. Here in the Mid-Atlantic region, we without a doubt have had the nicest day weather-wise in at least a month. 50s, beautiful sky. Spent the day cleaning out the chickens, doing some maintenance out there, doing some stuff in the garage. Took a nice long walk. And during that walk, there was two things that I had two ideas for the podcast today. One of them was not so much about Flat Earth, and that's why I was really wrestling with the fact, should I bring this up on the Flat Earth podcast? Because the whole reason I made a separate podcast was to keep this, little niche subject to the few who really wanted to pay attention to it. But at the same time, we really have to ask ourselves, how deep do the lies go? Like, is Flat Earth, the farthest realm of the conspiracy world? And there's a website that I like to visit, Upon the Face of Waters. They decode things, and they talk about the Bermuda Triangle, which we know is, I believe, one of the stories they use to keep the boaters and mariners out of the area, because that's where a lot of NASA's rockets fall. They don't go out into space because they can't. And it reminded me of a subject we covered a lot on our other podcast, The Fact Hunter, about the germ theory. And, as truthers, it's our response, and not just truthers, as human beings, right? It's our job to question everything. Because while we know that the government and the people at the highest realms of the government don't really look out for the people, you can take small nuggets of truth from them. Like Ronald Reagan once said, the 9 scariest words you could ever hear is that I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That is true, right? That resonates with most of us. Now, before we jump into today's podcast, first I want to thank you all for continuing to support. It's obvious that you all are sharing this podcast with others because, again, the fact that we have like 2,000 downloads and we just started this podcast, I need to see when the first podcast was. It couldn't have been more than 6 weeks ago. I'm looking at my computer here. The first one was November 30th. So this is like basically a month old, and it's obviously there's a lot of people out there who think like us. It's just a matter of getting enough folks on our team around us to have this conversation. But again, thank you. Also, just 2 other notes: questions, comments, concerns. You'd like to come on the podcast, like our friend Sean in Georgia, who will be joining me for an interview on the 11th. So you will hear that podcast. That'll be released the morning of the 12th, January 12th. And there's another listener who will be on in February. If you'd like to join me and share your thoughts on your awakening and what experiences led to, your awakening, and what you feel about Flat Earth, what are your secrets to sharing it with people? To me, it's always been breadcrumbs. If you just come out and say there's no such thing as germs and the Earth is flat, people are going to shut down immediately. But you have to leave small nuggets and trail, a trail of breadcrumbs. You can lead a horse to water, as the old expression says. So again, I look forward to having these interviews and basically discussions with other folks and presenting them to you in the form of a podcast. And again, we'll be doing this twice a week. Now, let's kick off today's podcast. How deep does the lie go? And, our first podcast was entitled Why the Lie? And today, here we are 8 episodes in, and we're talking about how deep do the lies really go? And to me, as I was walking today, I kind of figured there was about 3 levels of, and I just use this term because it's the narrative. I tend to call myself a critical thinker, but I just say there's 3 categories of conspiracy theories. Okay, there's the one which I call the water cooler level of conspiracy theories. That's where you can hang around at the break room at work and you can bring up said conspiracy theory, and it's not really going to lead to an argument, right? And I think those are Man on the Moon, which I think is so funny because, again, if you look at the history books, what is man's greatest accomplishment, right? Going to the moon. And if that's false, again, you have to question everything. If the biggest success is the biggest lie, you have to question everything. But again, things you can get away with at work and with friends where you're not going to cause an uproar. Obviously, the JFK assassination, going to the moon, and things like that. Then there's a middle tier, like there's some people who may have been indirectly involved with said incident or was alive when it happened, right? A lot of folks my age, I was a couple weeks old when we, quote unquote, went to the moon. I like to say I was 3 weeks old when they released the Going to the Moon movie. And the same with JFK. So our generation was 9/11. And that, right, if you come out and say, listen, 19 guys and a guy in a cave in Afghanistan took down our government. If you say that's a joke and you start to bring up Mossad and even the fact that the American government could have been responsible for it, that, in most cases isn't going to get people very upset. But I've seen very many cases where people will try to shut it down pretty quickly and they won't give you the time of day like they would say if they want to chat about the moon landing or JFK, those type of things. So those are the middle grounds, kind of the Oklahoma cities, 9/11, Waco, and more recently, COVID. And I think, to be honest with you, I think the scandemic is somewhere between 2 and 3. Still very fresh. And if you're paying attention to the news, right, if you're towing that fine line between being informed and misinformed, you'll see that they're already hyping up the COVID hysteria again. What the ends is, I don't know. If it's just Big Pharma trying to get you scared in the back of your mind for those few unvaccinated to rush off and get vaccinated, that could be one. Would they dare try to do what they did in 2020 again? Listen, I don't put anything past these tyrannical monsters, but I would highly doubt it. I mean, that would be really ballsy, pardon my language, but that, I don't think many people would stand for that. But you just don't know with these people. Agenda 2030 is only 7 years away. And I think they realize that they are at a standstill with people who are going to get vaccinated and people who are not going to get vaccinated, okay? Then there's what I like to call, level 3. The thing that if you bring up in a break room or at the dinner table, I shouldn't say the dinner table, because I think in most families, people are like-minded. Me and my wife, we're awake and hip to all this stuff, and we can have discussions with flat Earth and all these different type of things. Let's call it the Thanksgiving table, right, where our uncles, aunts, cousins may be very much out of the world of being awake, right? Those discussions which would instantly get shut down, right? And of course, you bring up flat Earth. A lot of people are going to shut you down. They're going to, oh, you stupid. That's a very common response to when you try to bring the subject up, right? Because the Edward Bernaysian people who use the propaganda in this country to manipulate people's minds have indoctrinated them to believe flat Earth equals low IQ. So if you bring that up at the Thanksgiving table, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get shut down. They wouldn't even give you the time of day to explain the ice wall and how water is level and the firmament and all the biblical. And that's the other thing that's a bit frustrating to me. There's a lot of folks who are, very much deep into Christianity, know the Bible in and out, but they won't take the Bible for its word. And, whether it be Genesis or Psalm 19-1, chapter 19, verse 1, they still believe man and NASA and the Mars rover and all this other stuff. It's just, and Greenland and all these other things. It's just a little disheartening. But the other one, and this, I guess, ties into COVID, is the germ theory. And as I was reading, their article that talked about, let me scroll down here. And again, this is from Upon the Face of Waters, interesting website. But Hollywood always gets into this esoteric stuff, and they are part of the system that Edward Bernays and Joseph Goebbels created to manipulate minds between Hollywood, TV, and mass media, all these things. Now, again, I want to preface this by saying I'm not a doctor, and all my podcasts I do, whether it's this or the Fact Hunter, I'm just giving you information and opinions. It's up to each and every person to make decisions for themselves. I always say go by Bill Cooper's rules, listen to everything, and then discern for yourself what's true, what's false, what's good, what's bad. I stay away from people who tell me to stay away from certain people. That's a waste of energy, and that's telling me that I don't have the IQ to discern what's truth and what's not for myself. So they talk about how illnesses are really spread, and you can't vaccinate against disease. And there was a very good theory that exposed germs as a hoax, and it's entitled Contagion Myth and Germ Theory Hoax for Dummies. And I thought I would share this with you today. And again, I realize that this is the Flat Earth Files podcast, but at the same time, I truly believe that these two subjects go hand in hand in the realms of things that, quote unquote, we just don't talk about, that the science is settled on. Okay? Now, we have Amish friends that do not get vaccinated, and they do not drink pasteurized milk. And they're healthy as horses. They don't go to the doctors, and they live long lives. Okay? We use a lot of plastics. We use cell phones. We get vaccinated. And listen, vaccination, in my opinion, and this is just me, guys, I don't want to convince anybody. I just am trying to pique your interest enough to take the time to research for yourself. And I know many folks who are listening to my voice today have already gone down this rabbit hole and are either nodding their head up and down or saying, listen, flat Earth's one thing, but germ theory is a hoax. That's a whole nother thing. But again, I implore you that, again, if they lie about man's greatest accomplishment, and in many corners of this world, it is known that Louis Pasteur was a fraud. And that's where pasteurization comes. And many people will tell you pasteurized milk is drinking dead milk. And it's not nearly as good for you as fresh cow milk or fresh goat's milk. Okay? And I'd like to read this story for you. Again, this is about a year and a half ago. And this whole, COVID and flu season, I think we have another 3 or 4 months of this mess again. Again, is it going to lead to lockdowns and everything else again? I don't think so, but I don't put anything past these monsters. So here we go. The satanic elite running the show behind COVID are hoping that the populace remains dummies with regard to the germ theory. And germs are just that, a theory. This post will brief expose on what I've learned over the past few months regarding germs and viruses and the truth about what makes us sick. Everyone needs to know this. It's the only way we are avoiding plunging into a new normal of medical apartheid and the loss of nearly all freedoms, assuming one wants to avoid routinely getting jabbed with a dose of poison vaccines. Now, I may have mentioned this on this podcast before, but my wife lost her job because she refused to get vaccinated. So this whole event last year did directly affect my family. And, as someone who served in the military for 24 years, I certainly have a deep disdain for the thing. I thought I was fighting for freedoms and liberties. And because we didn't succumb to a medical experiment, that it cost my wife her job. And, first generation America, moved over here at the age of 22, first person in our family to get a college degree, started as a CNA, worked her way up to be a very reputable nurse. And to have that happen to her really made me question a lot of my life choices. And again, I realize this is the Flat Earth podcast, but we're all in this truth journey together. So I think it's okay if we dabble a little bit outside of that every now and then. To understand how germs became such a fixed part of our culture, let's go back to the 19th century with the birth of modern bacteriology and Robert Koch. Now, Koch's postulates and how they are ignored. Now, The Contagion Myth, which is a book by Dr. Tim Cowan, is one of the most important and clearly written exposés on the subject post-COVID. And in that book, he introduces Koch's postulates. Now, Heinrich Koch, born in 1843 and died in 1910, is considered one of the founders of modern bacteriology. He created and improved laboratory technologies for isolating bacteria and also developed techniques for photographing bacteria. His research led to the creation of Koch's postulates, kind of a UPPBT for disease, which consists of 4 principles linking specific microorganisms to specific diseases. And his postulates are as follows. Just bear with me here for a minute. Number 1, the microorganism must be found in abundance in all organisms, suffering from the disease, but not found in healthy organisms. Number 2, the microorganism must be isolated from a diseased organism and grown in a pure culture. Number 3, the cultured microorganism should cause disease when introduced into a healthy organism. And number 4, the microorganism must be re-isolated from the now diseased experimental host, which received the inoculation. Now, if all 4 conditions are met, you have proven the infectious cause for a specific set of symptoms. Okay, this is the only way to prove causation. Interestingly enough, even Koch could not find proof of contagion using his postulates. Cue the 2013 movie Contagion and the brainwashing it did to the masses. He abandoned the requirement of the first postulate when he discovered carriers of cholera and typhoid fever who did not get sick. In fact, bacteriologists and virologists today believe that Koch's sensible and logical postulates, quote, have been recognized as largely obsolete by epidemiologists since the 1950s. So, the fact is, they are not used today, yet they are clearly the only way to prove that a germ is truly contagious. Then they go on to talk about Louis Pasteur, who was a fraud. And I covered him in a podcast last year. He was the father of the modern germ theory, while doing so ignoring Koch's postulates in his experiments to prove contagion. Now, in his book, Cohen wrote that Pasteur did this type of experiment for 40 years. He found sick people, claimed to have isolated a bacterium, gave the pure culture to animals, often by infecting it in their brains, and made them sick. And as a result of this, he became the first celebrity scientist of his time. He was feted by kings and prime ministers, and he was hailed as a great scientist. His work led to pasteurization, which is a technique responsible for destroying the integrity and health-giving properties of milk. His experiments ushered in the germ theory of disease. And for over a century, this radical new theory has dominated not only the practice of Western medicine, which again was hijacked by the Rockefellers, but also by our cultural and economic life. And by the way, this is no deed, a shot at the entire medical industry. There are great surgical hands. I've seen friends get hit by IEDs and put back together. We've seen our friends and possibly family members who've been in bad car accidents and put back together. There is a lot of great people in the medical community. However, in the pharmaceutical community, we have to question that. We've seen it firsthand for the last couple of years. In 1914, Professor Gerard Geisen of Princeton University published an analysis of Pasteur's notes, which revealed that Pasteur had committed massive fraud in all his studies. For instance, when he said that he injected virulent anthrax spores into vaccinated and unvaccinated animals, he could trumpet the fact that the unvaccinated animals died. But that was because he also injected the unvaccinated animals with poisons. In the notes, Pasteur stated unequivocally that he was unable to transfer disease with a pure culture of bacteria. He obviously wasn't able to purify viruses at the time either. So in fact, the only way he could transfer disease was to either insert the whole infected tissue into another animal. In some cases, he would inject ground up brains of an animal into the brain of another to prove contagion, okay? Or resort to adding poisons to his culture, which he knew would cause the symptoms in the recipients. He admitted that the whole effort to prove contagion was a failure, leading to his famous deathbed confession. The germ is nothing. The terrain is everything. So for those, if for the first time hearing this, if you've never heard of terrain theory is what we're talking about. And in this case, terrain refers to the condition of the animal or person and whether the animal or person has been subjected to poison. So to sum up, the only way he was able to make it seem like he was injecting a suspect bacteria into another organism that made them sick was by also injecting the cell culture or organism with poisons. And this fails to follow the basic rule of an experiment. One variable at a time. And that is something an elementary schooler can understand. But to this day, his deception, backed by the satanic elite, has held its ground and become common knowledge and the basis of pathology. Just like questioning the globe, right? The globe is common knowledge. If you go to Wikipedia or if you go to YouTube, this is a great example. Bear with me. I'm going to YouTube and I'm just going to go in the search engine and put, the search box on YouTube and put flat earth, and the very first thing you get on top, and this is before all the the videos. Flat Earth, Wikipedia. The flat Earth model is an archaic and scientifically disproven conception of Earth's shape as a plane or disk. Now, in most cases, the algorithms don't really take out flat Earth channels. However, if you get into terrain theory, and especially during the quote unquote pandemic, it was not unusual for your channel to get eliminated for daring to question any of it, for questioning the vaccine, so on and so forth. But there's lots of information. And of course, there's 7 auto-generated moments, the COVID-19 pandemic, one thing after another. You get all the warnings when you look into terrain theory versus germ theory. So there you go. And to me, anytime you get a warning like that, that should open your eyes, especially after everything we've seen over the last 2.5, 3 years, right? So they go on to say what really makes us sick. Eastern medicine, like Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine, never speak of contagion, but simply of imbalances in the system. Western terrain medicine, too, names only 4 causes of all illnesses and disease. Number 1, poisons, toxins in our food, air, and water. And we'll get to all this. Number 2, starvation, which is, not only not eating at all, but eating food that is simply poor in nutrient quality, right? Number 3 is an insult to injury to the tissue, car accident, things of that nature. And then psychological injury or trauma, because, believe it or not, the psyche and emotions are more tied to physical health than most people even realize. So under the first point, toxins, some of these do indeed come from certain strains of bacteria. The most common example being food poisoning. But it's not the proliferation of bacteria on the rotting food that makes you sick. It's the toxins in the bacteria that it excretes out when they eat dead or rotting flesh, which is, of course, their job in nature as a decomposer. You can also get into, they talk about food, air, or water. Edward Bernays, again, he was paid to get people to accept putting fluoride into the water. It's supposed to do wonders for your teeth. 4 of the 5 top countries in the world, like the 5 highest cancer rates countries in the world, 4 of those 5 have fluoridated water. Cancer didn't become a huge thing in this country until well into the 30s, when they started putting fluoride in water, and all the plastics and the DuPonts. The hemp industry was killed, and they started putting all this petro-based stuff into plastics. And, of course, vaccinations. You look at the vaccination schedule from 100 years ago and today, it's through the roof. Right? And Louis Pasteur's experiments with cell cultures, the only way he made it seem like bacteria were killing the cells was by either poisoning or starving the cells first. They go on to say, here in my hometown, there's a lake nearby that we were warned not to swim in or let our dogs drink from because of toxic amounts of blue-green algae. But goes on to say it's most likely due to a pollutant or trash dumping into the lake that made this algae proliferate and produce the toxin in the first place. Thus, the algae itself is not the primal cause, but only a secondary symptom, if you will, because of the imbalance in nature. And the same is true for all modern diseases that appear to come from viruses or bacteria or germs, right? Let's look at cholera for a moment, all right? The disease is not caused, as the medical literature says, by the bacteria Vibrio cholera, but rather this strain of bacteria that eats the sewage that builds up in the drinking waters of countries with poor sanitation. And, when they talk about polio and how all these vaccines made this country healthy, it was after World War II, the indoor plumbing and our plumbing system became mainstream, and people weren't, how do I say, pooping where they make their food. When we're in the military, we have a rule. I forget how many hundreds of feet you have to put the porta potties and the latrines away from where we keep our water buffaloes and the MKTs where we cook our food. It was just, we became a cleaner people. Okay, you look at the peoples in 20s and 30s versus post-World War II, the housing boom, indoor plumbing, everybody washed their hands, brushed their teeth. That in itself led people to live long, healthy lives and stay away from disease, okay? And we can even talk about electricity. Dr. Cowan spent some time in the book talking about the connections between the installation of new electronic and radio wave technology into society and many of the major plagues that were blamed on contagious germs. There's many articles and books and YouTube channels that are dedicated to that type of radio wave poisoning, and how every time there was an invention with radio or electricity, there was an outbreak of illness that happened simultaneously, whether it be 1918 or 3G, 4G, 5G. It is widely known that Wuhan, China, had 5G installed November 1st, 2019 in Wuhan. And that apparently is where the story goes, where it starts. And shortly thereafter, I believe it was instituted in Seattle, Washington around the same time. And the story goes that the very first person who had COVID was out of Seattle. Now, a lot of people say it was spread through the military Wuhan Games, which took place in October of 2019, right? They had militaries from, I forget, 150 countries maybe, and they let it out there. People got sick, and they spread it amongst the population. There's the theory it was released out of Fort Detrick, Maryland, and there's the theory where it was just another flu season, and they murdered a lot of people with remdesivir and intubation, and the whole goal was to get to the vaccination. But the point is, as truthers, we have to question everything, whether it be electricity and disease, where, again, 1836, author Heinrich Zweig noted that all physiological processes produce electricity, and theorized that an electrical disturbance of the atmosphere may prevent the body from discharging it. He repeated the then common belief that the accumulation of electricity in one's body causes the symptoms of influenza. And it goes on and on and on. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it talks about during World War I, governments on both sides of the conflict installed antennas, which eventually blanketed the earth with strong radio signals. And what happened during World War I? 1918, disaster struck. The Spanish flu, which was neither Spanish or flu, afflicted a third of the world's population, and according to his storybooks, killed about 50 million people. More than the Black Death of the 14th century. So, to stop the contagion, communities shut down schools, businesses, and theaters. People were ordered to wear masks and refrain from shaking hands. And of course, that cycle would repeat itself almost 100 years later, right? They go on to say, and this is something I didn't really think about, those living on military bases, which bristled with antennas, were the most vulnerable. A common system was bleeding from the nostrils, gums, ears, skin, etc. Many died of hemorrhage in the lungs, drowning in their own blood. Tests revealed a decreased ability of the blood to coagulate. Those close to the death often developed that peculiar blue color which seemed to mark all early fatal cases. And of course, it would later be said that, this all generated from Fort Riley, Kansas, due to bad vaccinations. But maybe it was some kind of strange radio waves they were using there. Who knows? And that begs the question, how deep does the lie go? That's the question I wanted to raise here. We really need to question everything. And while, Flat Earth will be our main subject here, I thought it was very important to bring this up today, especially in a time where they are doing everything in their power to get you to submit to medical martial law, for lack of a better word. So, if the new technologies are to blame for massive outbreaks, why did they go away? Why didn't Spanish flu continue to take out the entire world? Since we are, after all, blanketed in radio waves and now with 5G. And to answer this question, the very particle they turned into the culprit, viruses themselves, according to the author. So we'll finish up with this. What are viruses really, if not a contagion? As far as we can tell, they are bits of DNA or RNA with a protein coat. This supposed strand of DNA or RNA, unique to people displaying symptoms of COVID, has not been isolated, nor been injected into another healthy organism and made that organism sick with the same symptoms per Koch's postulates. But as to what viruses actually do is far different from what we are told. First of all, they're indistinguishable from exomes, a particle that is natural to the immune system and part of the normal immune response. And there's a lecture from Dr. Andrew Kaufman that you can check out. You probably have to check it out on Rumble. It definitely wouldn't be on YouTube. And of course, they go on to talk about how some will test positive for COVID using the PCR test, and that is because those tests were used incorrectly and they were amplified. Now, if you're following along this far, some of the false positive, therefore, will display unique symptoms like loss of smell, lung issues, as a result of the new 5G towers in your area. And I thought it was funny, not funny, haha, but interesting, I should say, that all my friends who, quote unquote, got COVID lived in a, I don't want to say like a metropolitan area, but in a big city, and certainly had towers near them. Whereas I'm out here, there's a house every 1,000 feet. Everybody has a couple acres, so every house is about a 3 wood away. And none of us out here in the country really experienced COVID. We go to the auctions every Wednesday. Our life was relatively normal. We still had a few people that wear the masks. And unfortunately, they were people who got the jab. And generally, those are the people who got sick. And I'll make one more point about this. Look at China. Again, if you're on that fine line between being uninformed and misinformed and peeking in on the news, you'll see that China is just out of control again. Well, if you believe the news and the numbers, China is well over 90% vaccinated. So how is it they're having all these numbers? Well, I'll tell you why. It's probably because of the vaccines. So, there's so many other questions, sicknesses and symptoms break out in a family, but many invisible things pass from person to person. For example, if someone yawns in a room and soon 2 or 3 other 4 people are yawning, something has passed visibly, or I should say invisibly, between them to make that urge to yawn contagious. So too is the phenomenon of chickenpox and flu. But in either case, do you posit the germ particles as the enemy? It's more likely something that is being exchanged in the more subtle physic and etheric realms. And in the case of exomes spreading, like say with the chickenpox, again, the purpose is to spread the adaptive cellular strategy. And sure enough, people who get chickenpox as children are healthier in the long run. Everyone knows this. Again, an adult who gets chickenpox is 25 times more likely to die. And this is because they were not exposed to the exosomes as a child that would have prepared them for whatever stressor really causes that set of symptoms we call chickenpox. So again, it's better that you inherit these things naturally, just like in 2008 when the quote-unquote, was it the swine flu in 2008, 2009? And Fauci was on record as saying natural immunity is better. Get sick, your body conquers it, and you're good. Yet over the last 13 years later, the only thing that can stop it is a vaccine. So obviously he's bought, sold, and owned by big pharmaceuticals. And that begs the question, how deep does the lie go? We know it's about money, it's about power. If you recall, during March, April, May, June, July 2020, you couldn't get any bacterial wipes. They're wiping everything, right? It'd be in Target. Even today, when we go to Sam's Club once a month or whatever, every 6 weeks to load up on things, there's a giant display of wipes to wipe down the cart. And here's my challenge for you all. And again, we're going right back to the flat earth discussions after this, but this is something I really wanted to share with you, because how deep does the lie go, right? If they can lie about where we live, and you think about vaccines, and then two things I challenge you to do. Go watch that movie Contagion and realize that this happened before COVID, and look at all the subtleties. You'll see globes. You'll see things being passed from person to person and the whole chain of them getting sick. All this had to be done before COVID kicked off. They had to program your minds. And that's a large part of Hollywood, television, the media. By the way, interesting thought, right? Some people say that germ theory, again, very much like heliocentrism, is a huge part of the satanic agenda. And we've talked about the numbers, numerology that go with heliocentrism. But if you look at all the disinfectants, you'll see that many of them claim to kill 99.9% of germs, right? Again, I think Dawn does, and many of the hand wipes that you saw during the height of the pandemic, they claim to kill 99.9% of germs. Take that bottle and turn it upside down. That 99.9 is a 666 when you turn it upside down. And Dawn in gematria equals 66. And an anagram of Dawn is wand. And that is something that people use to claim to do magic. We talk about magic with a K. And listen, I have really danced out of the realm of the flat earth, but I wanted it to bring to your attention that there are a lot of things out there, more than just the flat earth, that will challenge us as truthers. And there can't be a mountain big enough that we can't go after. That's my challenge to you as we enter 2023, is how deep do the lie goes? I don't think that was perfect English. How deep does the lie go, right? That's my question to you. We need to question everything. And I think in order for us to grow as a flat earth community to get the truth out, we also have to let folks know that while this may seem outrageous to you, this is just one of hundreds and thousands of lies that has been perpetrated against mankind to keep us enslaved, to keep us, inside a mason jar, to be, we need to be governed in case of an emergency. We need the government there to help us. We don't need them. They need us. We are the 99%. They're the 1%. Yet they have 99% of the wealth. Their wealth has, grown by 300%. Ours has grown by 0. So let's work together, expose the lies. Let's have a goal that in 2023, that flat earth can be a subject that everyone can discuss without any stigmas or without being looked down to, and understand that there are a lot more lies out there that we haven't even stopped to think about. And I'm sure that most of you folks who are listening to this podcast, or at least still are, and again, I'm imploring you that I'm not a doctor, but it's important for us to question everything. And again, if this government has been pushing vaccines, if you remember last winter, the winter of 2021, that was supposed to be the dark black winter of death when we were all supposed to die if we didn't get vaccinated. And now the Canadian government, my friend William Boot sent me a message today saying that people who are unvaccinated should be given mental health prescriptions. And I said, what a shocker, more money for big pharmaceutical, right? But we have to continue to fight the good fight and question everything, no matter how trivial or matter how intimidating it may be, right? And we will continue the fight. And I want to thank you guys for being flexible and hearing me out. And again, I'm somewhere in between on this, but I think it's important because this has so many reaches to it. It goes from contagion to germ. Again, I have friends, we have Amish friends that do not pasteurize the milk, and pasteurizing the milk kills a lot of the good parts of it. So again, how deep does the lie go? That is my question for you. And if there's any other things that, maybe that is on your mind, whether it be flat earth or not, I'd appreciate it if you hit me up and we can have the discussion. And if you have ideas on how we can come together as a community, would a call-in show be a good idea? Would roundtables be a good idea? Things of that nature. Let me know what you think. And again, everyone have a safe New Year's, especially if you're going to be at parties or out with friends. Not everyone on the roads this Saturday night are going to be great drivers, that's for sure. So there you go. That's it for today. I want to thank you for your time, and I really look forward to your comments, which I'm sure I'm going to get plenty of. But it's important we question everything as truthers, and we'll be back with another episode of the Flat Earth Files in just a few days as we continue to expose the fraud that is the globe. Until next time, my friends, thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep your head on a swivel, and we'll see you.
Hunter Radio Network.
Just the facts, ma'am.
Hey, hon, we really need new phones.
T-Mobile will cover the cost of 4 amazing new iPhone 15s, and each line is only $25 a month.
New iPhone 15s? Best new year ever.
Get 4 iPhone 15s on us with eligible trade-in when you switch to T-Mobile.
Minimum of 4 lines for $25 per line per month with autopay discount using debit or bank account. $5 more per line without autopay, plus taxes and fees. Phone fee at 24 monthly bill credits for well-qualified customers. Contact us before canceling account to continue bill credits or credit stop and balance on required finance agreement due. $35 per line connection charge applies. See T-Mobile.com.
Hey, hon, we really need new phones.
T-Mobile will cover the cost of 4 amazing new iPhone 15s, and each line is only $25 a month.
New iPhone 15s? Best new year ever.
Get 4 iPhone 15s on us with eligible trade-in when you switch to T-Mobile.
Minimum of 4 lines for $25 per line per month with auto pay discount using debit or bank account. $5 more per line without auto pay, plus taxes and fees. Phone fee at 24 monthly bill credits for well qualified customers. Contact us before canceling account to continue bill credits or credit stop and balance on required finance agreement due. $35 per line connection charge applies. See T-Mobile.com.